And we now cross live to our reporter, Patricia Visagie, who is at the North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria. Patricia, a very good afternoon to you and welcome to PM News. Now, another grueling day for Oscar in court today. Please take us through the day's proceedings.
Well, today was the fourth day for the Paralympian, of course, taking the stand in his own defense. It's the second day, of course, under cross-examination by the state, as he was taken on again by the state prosecutor, Advocate Harry Nel. But it seemed like, the Paralympian had undergone a mind shift. He seemed much more composed, much more in control of his emotions today than what we have seen throughout this week since he started taking the stand in his own defense starting at the beginning of this week. Today he seemed much more in control of what he was saying, although Advocate Harry Nel continued grilling him on the stand, trying to highlight some glaring discrepancies in his testimony. Of course, another element that took place today, the text messages between the Paralympian Oscar Pistorious and of course his girlfriend Reeva again being focused on in court. Advocate Harry Nel trying to highlight the cracks in their relationship, trying to portray Reeva as having been under strain in the relationship that she had with the Paralympian. He also again went on to highlight his love for guns. Now, we do know that the Paralympian is also facing charges relating to contravening the country's Firearms Control Act for two incidences where he allegedly handled a firearm recklessly in public. Of course, the 2012 one where he fired through the sunroof of a moving vehicle, and the one that took place last year where he discharged a firearm, or rather a pistol in a packed restaurant in Johannesburg. So that came under scrutiny again in a court today, and the second half of this trial today focused on the morning of Valentine's Day. What exactly happened? When did Reeva Steenkamp leave his bedroom, and how come the Paralympian didn't see her leave the bed which they shared on that night, and of course the morning of Valentine's Day, before he shot and ultimately killed her? But to take us more through today's proceedings, I am joined by a guest today, and that is Laurie James, a crime expert, who will give us more detail and analysis as to what came out in court today. Laurie, thank you for joining us once again here.
Thank you.
Now, it seemed like it was a much better day for the Paralympian on the stand today.
Yes, he definitely had a lot better control of his emotions. Of course, the testimony was less emotional. Harry Nel didn't walk him yet again through the discovery of the body, and there were no graphic images shown. So it was much easier for him to keep his composure, bearing in that the trigger elements were not featured today in the testimony.
And of course, those text messages between the Paralympian and the deceased being highlighted in court once again, but the state putting emphasis on, the messages that were not so loving, normal, as we have seen, of course, the defense trying to portray earlier this week. What is the state trying to drive by putting so much emphasis on those text messages?
The state is trying to show that the relationship between Steenkamp and Pistorious is not as rosy as as Pistorious was trying to get the court to believe. They also focused extensively on the fact that he seemed to continuously relate the circumstances of the relationship to him. Everything was narcissistic, everything is from his point of view. He doesn't accept blame for any responsibility for things that went wrong in the relationship, turning it around, placing the blame firmly at the feet of Reeva Steenkamp's friend in the one example, and then back again on Reeva Steenkamp herself, saying it was her fault and his behavior is triggered by her behavior, which she actually outlined in her messages. She pointed out that she's afraid of him because she doesn't know how he is going to react to what she does. So it highlighted that fear almost an abusive relationship type component, and the narcissistic theme throughout, showing how he is solely focused on his needs inside of the relationship.
And of course, his love for guns coming under scrutiny once again, obviously in relation to the charges that he faces for contravening the country's Firearms Control Act. What did you pick up on that?
Well, what I picked up there is that the state consistently highlighted irresponsible behavior in contravention of the Firearms Act. For example, leaving his magazine out in his bedside table, not putting things away. Another thing that came out in that testimony was the fact that he says that he has no communication with his father, and yet in the next breath he said that his father entered the house in order to put in the ammunition into his safe, to which many people had access, again in contravention of the Firearms Act. But interesting that he had no communication with his father, but his father could gain access, had a key to his home, and could enter his home when he wasn't even there in order to put ammunition in a safe. These are glaring inconsistencies in the story again.
Now, he admitted to being reckless by taking the firearm in that restaurant, but he denied pulling the trigger, of course, prompting Advocate Gerrie Nel to accusing him of lying and not wanting to take responsibility for anything.
Absolutely. Captain Nongena testified earlier on that this weapon is impossible to discharge without pulling the trigger. Pistorious came back saying his finger was not on the trigger. Not he doesn't recall his finger being on the trigger, but definitely his finger was not on the trigger. Captain Nongena was never questioned on the fact that this weapon cannot be discharged without a finger on the trigger. So it brings into sharp contrast how is this possible, and Gerrie Nel actually sort of phrased it as the miracle discharge. So again, it brings into doubt Oscar's version, and also brings into doubt that into play he's being an unreliable witness in that he is not prepared to even concede the obvious.
And now the second half of the court focused more on the incident that, of course, took place on, the 14th of February last year. The main reason why we are here at this trial, of course. But Advocate Gerrie Nel highlighted how the Paralympian did not see Reeva Steenkamp leaving the bed which they shared on that night and that morning. What did you pick up from that?
Well, that sort of followed on from yesterday's theme, where he first admitted that he never went outside onto the balcony, that he simply moved the fan, that he wasn't had never left the room at any point. There was a lot of questioning today about ambient lighting. He said he didn't see Reeva. Then he says that Reeva's legs were under the duvet. How would he know that if he didn't see her? Everything was focused on the minute detail and the improbabilities of the scene being as it was in the light of, and how that would work into Oscar's story. Again, throwing doubts on the entire story.
And of course, that was crime analyst Laurie James taking us through the court proceedings here at the Oscar Pistorious murder trial at the North Gauteng High Court. Of course, tomorrow we will be back covering this trial again here at the North Gauteng High Court.
Thank you so much to Patricia Visagie, SABC reporter, with crime analyst Laurie James giving us an analysis of the day's proceedings in the North Gauteng High Court on day 20 of the Oscar Pistorious murder trial. The court resumes tomorrow morning.